Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Welcome to part two of my chat with Kate Panfile. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage, and stay tuned for a truly insightful conversation. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my intuition till it's popping up.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Welcome to part two with Kate. Welcome back to the show, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's continue our conversation that we
All
were
right.
talking with off camera and from the last show. I mean, you help parents who are struggling dealing with the fact that your child is autism and they hit that fight and flight mode. What has been the most challenging thing you've had to deal with?
So I think that the most challenging thing is the pivot
Hmm.
that has to happen at some point where you realize that it's not about your child, it's about you. It's about you as a parent, it's about you as a human. It is about, your experience and your expectations for not only your child but also yourself and your own parenting journey, right? So, you have this idea that it's just human nature to have expectations or to predict what's going to happen, or to think about what's going to happen. And I think for a lot of parents, me included, you know when we face an obstacle, when we face a difficulty, our knee-jerk reaction is always like, how can we solve this?
Hmm.
Like, what can we do? How can we solve it? And I think that it's when you take a step back and say, like, this isn't something I need to solve. There is nothing to solve because there's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken, there's nothing to fix. That is where you're able to have that pivot, grieve that journey that you thought you'd have, and start connecting with your kid. Like, start building that understanding of where they're at and meeting them there.
Now, do you remember your first experience with a parent who's got a newly diagnosed child, and what were their feelings on that first few weeks? What were they going through? What was going through their mind? How did you calm them down and say, listen, yes, your child just got this diagnosis, but it's also more about you as well.
It's a great question. Um, I think that is really how it's funny to take it into the bigger context. You think of, like, I think of my career and just my path of what, I started as a teacher. I wanted to work with kids who did have, different learning needs. Then I ended up working with their families, being a case manager. Now I've really kind of niched down to, like, really wanting to work with that neurodiversity umbrella in the school and now out of the school. And I say all this because all of it was a comfort zone for me. We were talking
Hmm.
about comfort zones,
Yeah.
and, like, all of that teaching in general is like a comfort zone for me. It comes very naturally to me. If you went, back into my childhood, my dad had installed, like, a chalkboard in my bedroom, and I made everyone play school with me. And I was always a teacher. I always had to be the teacher. You could probably go to my siblings and ask how annoying that was. I was always the teacher. But teaching has always come really naturally to me. So, and why I say that is because, I found myself in this spot where now we're sitting on a feedback with a parent and the diagnosis of autism comes up. And it's interesting because I was in that conversation, right? But I'm not a doctor.
Mhm.
I'm somebody who has really dove or dived deep into the autistic brain style and understanding how it works, and also understanding like what that means for school and your school needs and how to help a kid in school. But the idea that it's almost like a fly on the wall, like I got to be a fly on the wall in watching parents kind of go through this.
Mhm.
And what I very organically like learned was almost every parent who received that diagnosis had some inkling about it. There were not many people who came into it and were blindsided by it. Maybe they didn't know what it was, maybe they didn't know, whether they didn't want to put a label to it, whatever the case may be. They had an inkling, they had an idea. And regardless of that, it still was like a gut punch. Like
Mhm.
to hear I don't want to say finality because it's not that, but
Mhm.
like to get confirmation of it, right?
Yeah.
And you get 45 minutes, like in our feedbacks, you got 45 minutes to like an hour and 15 minutes, right? With some other doctors, it might be, different. Because we were going over all the test results and that kind of thing. And it was a piece of the conversation. But there's some who they're just, they're at like a typical doctor's appointment, or that's the route that they've went, not the, neuropsychological testing route. And, so you get this very limited amount of time. And now you hear this and you get this diagnosis, and to even process it enough to come up with the questions that you may have is like not a fair thing to ask
No, I
parents to do.
mean, I think their body goes into a state of shock at that point.
Absolutely. And again, regardless of how ready they were for this.
Yeah.
So, because how do you even prepare questions when you don't know the answer you're going to get, right? So
Yeah.
it's this fallacy that like
Mhm.
the day of the diagnosis or the day you find this out is going to be like the day that you get answers, because
Yeah.
you end up where you really end up is in a spot. I always like to say, like, you feel like you're in the middle of the ocean. You may have one of those like lifesaver rafts, but like you can't even see land because you don't even know what questions to ask. So what would happen, and what I experienced, was that whether it was a few days, a few weeks, even a few months later, I would hear from those parents again,
Mhm.
and they'd be like, I'm really having a difficult time with this. Or can you tell me, you said this at the feedback, I remember you saying something about this. What did that mean? What does that look like? How can we support that? And what I found was I was doing a lot of that, those conversations like after the fact.
Mhm.
And it caused me to think back on my own journey of it too.
Mhm.
Um, And the fact that, like, for me, we were hooked up with a developmental pediatrician.
Mhm.
So we have ongoing appointments. So, like, every 6 months, I do get to ask a bunch of questions and I do get to, do that. Some people don't have that. Some people can't even get into that kind of doctor right now. The wait lists are so outrageous. And so that was really how this all came about because, you know, and I think it has to come about that way, to be totally honest, because think about like, this is always the example I like to give because it's kind of like visceral. If your child's having a meltdown, like one of the best things you can do is like to reduce the language demand. Because
Mhm.
at that point in time, like there's so much coming in, like to when you're talking, you're not even giving the brain a choice, but to
Mhm.
process what's coming in. So you have to stop
Yeah.
talking. You have
Yeah.
to shut up, right? But that's a lot easier to say to a parent who you have rapport with and you have a relationship with and
Yeah.
you've built that over the course of a few weeks or a few months versus saying it to a parent in a feedback session when you've met them one time for an hour. You just
No,
have to
yeah,
shut up when your kid is, they're like,
yeah.
what? Like, again, so I think that before you hear, like the big takeaway is like before you can even accept that you have a piece of this, like that you have a responsibility in this as a parent, the relationship and rapport with somebody who you trust to walk with you during this process is so important. And that is truly what I hope to be for people.
Now, what do you usually not say to them, and what do you actually need to hear?
um, yeah, I mean, I think that for me, like I am not perfect and I don't have this all figured out. So one of the hardest things for me, like even just in looking at like what I wanted to do and how I wanted to serve my community, we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome that pops up here and there. It was the idea of like, where are we starting and where are we getting to? Like where am I walking with people to? Like where's our destination? And I think, at the end of the day, autism support and autism education, it's ongoing
Hmm.
and it ebbs and it flows. And when you think you've learned the rules to the game, all of a sudden the game changes,
Oh, yeah.
a whole different game. And that is where like finding your people and building your village is so important because that ebb and that flow, you're in it and you're not, and you're in the thick of it, and then you're not, and then you're in these really tough seasons. And you have to remember that there are, not as tough seasons that also, come from that. And that is really truly where I think, you know, you I am looking to work with people who are not looking for a quick fix. They're
Yeah,
not looking to fix something really at all. They're
yeah.
not looking for a cure. Um, and you don't have to have it all figured out. The other huge piece is that, and going back to like, I'm not perfect, like you only can work with the information you have and the
So
information that's
true.
out there. So, like I'll be the first to admit, like a couple years ago, it was we need to, we need to put autistic children in social skills groups. These are the opportunities we need to give them. We need to give them more opportunities with typically developing peers, and that's what they push in school too. Inclusion, the least restrictive environment, all of these things that really at face value sound great,
Hmm.
but what it really turns into is pushing a child into a neurotypical box. I need you to act like your other peers. What does typically developing even mean at this point, in this at this moment in time? But I will be the first one to admit that like I had my child in a social skills group. And it wasn't until my child said to me, like, but I don't want to be there. And I don't want to be there because these are the kids who are too loud for me, or these are the kids who talk too much for me, or these are the kids, like whatever, whatever the couple things he said to me were. And I had to as a parent, you try to do what's best for your kid, but like I also had to admit that I was wrong
Yeah.
and that wasn't the best thing for my child at that moment in time. And then, here we are, like you look a year later and it's like, hey, social skills group are not the way to go with your kid. And I'm like, well, there you go. So I think you have to give yourself grace. You know, Parents need to know that they have to give themselves grace because we're not always going to get it right.
Now, when the parent gets to you and after they get all this information, how do you help them sort out for all the overwhelming stuff, the therapies, the school, family pressure, even researching on Google and telling them, don't trust Google at all, don't trust anything you read online because it's not 100% accurate. How do you get them for all that to the point of this is where you need to be, not here?
I think the biggest piece is that, and I, it's funny because I obviously can talk and I can talk about autism all day long.
Mhm.
Um, I have learned what I've learned over the last decade. And so for even for myself, I have to remind myself that for some of these parents, they've been in it 2 months or 2 years.
Mhm.
And it's not at all a comparison, right? We're not we're it's not a linear path we're all walking. It's not that I'm eight more miles in front of you. It's just you can't compare somebody who's on chapter 2 to somebody who's on chapter 10. And that same way, like, yes, I have so much information that I want to share, and I have so much information that I could share with you, but it could also be really, really overwhelming. And I have a wonderful husband who always reminds me of that, and he always puts that into perspective of like, explain this to me like I'm not you. And I don't read about this all the time, and I this is not my jam, right?
Mhm.
What explain it to me like that. And it's a great reminder for me because it just puts everything into perspective on the fact that it can feel really overwhelming. And I think that ultimately you have to take it one step at a time. It's that 1% better idea
Mhm.
that all these productivity and habit books talk about. It's the idea that if you can do one thing, if you can learn one thing, if you can implement one thing each day, in a year, you are going to be, I think there's like some percentage, but you're going to be like some ridiculous percentage in front of where you were. Whereas if you do nothing, you're going to be in the same spot.
Now, I want to circle back and talk about something we talked off before we started recording, and that is why do you feel parents freeze, panic the minute they get this diagnosis? And like, why do they not consider their own well-being when they get this diagnosis of their child? And why, how can you get them from realizing, hey, this is your child's on the right path. Now, you need to worry on you.
Yeah. I think that, as humans, we our first instinct is to find a solution for things.
Hmm.
And I think it's very natural. Like that is the natural instinct and reaction of most people. So I think for parents, that is like the knee jerk first thought or first couple thoughts of like, okay, now what do we do about it? Right. And it's, I think, easier and I think it's offered more, right? So there's like this double edge or this duality to it where what are you hearing from most doctors giving diagnoses or from most medical providers? It's, you know, call these ABA companies. We're recommending OT, we're recommending ABA, we're recommending floor time, whatever the recommendation is. I've never seen, I do put it in my stuff, but I've never seen in somebody else's stuff or reports or recommendations, like find somebody for yourself to talk to,
Oh yeah.
right? Like find and listen, whether that's a professional, whether that's a friend, whether that's a family member, like that is where you need to start finding your people. I think that the recommendations are most of the, or in like, listen, I've seen recommendations like, hey, go read this book, but that who has time, like you just
I
got the
mean,
diagnosis. Now you're on Google. Now you're reading books. Now I have to read
yeah,
books. Now I have to learn. Like
you're
you feel like
overloaded.
you're 25 steps behind of where you should be. Yeah,
You're,
exactly.
you're overloaded, overwhelmed. I mean, to bring up a great scenario, it's like when I had an interview a long time ago, I had with a job and it was via Zoom. I had everything up on the company on my computer on one page, and it was just too much information for my mind to handle. And when it came time to ask questions or answer questions, my mind is just like, what do I do? I
Yeah.
have all this information here. How do I weed through this and what to ask and what to remember what he did ask? And it's almost the same thing with a parent is the minute they get that word, your child has autism. It's like their mind goes into overload. And it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? And it's like you said, that it's that one moment of I don't think about myself. Because I think parents think at one point they're okay, but they don't realize they're okay.
And I think, yeah, I think there is this, you look at what going into shock is, and, people who are in shock, they may not feel even like physical pain, right?
Yeah.
And it's your body's way of protecting itself. And I think, you can imagine that, maybe not as dramatic, it may not be as dramatic, but the idea that our protective instinct, even the most well-meaning people, um, it's to fix
Yeah.
or to solve. And I think that when we fall into the fixing and the solving, that's where we can very easily fall into pathologizing it and the idea that there is something wrong, broken, to be fixed, whatever. And there's a huge caveat here, and I want to put this out there, that there are most definitely things for a lot of children or older people getting this diagnosis that do need to be supported,
Yeah.
right? So, a lot of times when kids are really young, what are the huge red flags? It's you're not speaking. You have a huge, language delay or communication delay. What does that cause? It causes frustration, that causes meltdowns. Now there's a huge behavioral component, right? Whereas typically, like, what my experience has been is the older, like when you get to like the teenage years and beyond, and you weren't red flagged as a kid, which I believe really happens when like there isn't that, maybe that behavioral component to it, where like if you are not having trouble emotionally regulating, you get missed. You fly under that radar, that the whole girl profile. But for the older and the later diagnosed, I think then it's dealing with almost like those, I'm like blanking on the word, but like the things that happen like as a result of,
Hmm.
whether that's anxiety, whether that's depression, whether that's, whatever co-occurring condition ends up happening. That's where we're seeing that, because now you've lived a certain experience, and that's the result. That is, I think, where, you know, there is absolutely room to support your child and to
Yeah.
find that village for them. And it's very important whether you're finding, regardless of what therapy or what support you are putting in place, like I am in no way, shape, or form discounting that or like devaluing that. But my main piece in this space is that at the same time, we do need to be taking care of ourselves.
I mean, to build on that and to ask a huge question, how do we change the parents' perspective and unlearn them that fix it mentality of this needs to be fixed, they need to be fixed? Because parents I know get scared when they hear the diagnosis because they think, oh God, there's something wrong with my child. We need to fix it. How do we unlearn that from them to the point of, no, they don't need to be fixed. They need to be worked with, helped, and dealt with the proper way.
I think there's many approaches, and I think they all kind of need to happen in tandem, or, at the same time simultaneously. And the more we can do it, the better off we'll be as a society and as a people. I think that we have to get there has to, like, listen, there has to be awareness before there's acceptance, right? So, there's this big push to call it Autism Acceptance Month, and I get it, right? But like, we can't accept if we're not even aware. And for us in this space, like, we're very aware because this is the space we live in. But
Mhm.
for a lot of people, they're not aware or they don't have a lot of information about it, and that makes people feel uncomfortable. That's where people are uncomfortable asking questions, or you get the little kids who stare because somebody looks different or somebody acts different. And those are those hard conversations that we as parents have to have, and whatever, even outside of this, right?
Mhm.
So I think there just needs to be more information and more understanding out there of what it is and what it looks like and how it can present. And I think at the same time, I think that, there has to be a shift in the medical side of things where, a whole different can of worms that you can get into is that a lot of this comes back to like what insurance will cover.
Mhm.
So insurance will only cover certain goals. Insurance will
Mhm.
only cover certain, certain interventions. Insurance will only cover certain things. So until that changes, I think that it will be difficult because that's the narrative being written. But I do think that from a medical level, you know, okay, we need to label it as this level or this, whatever, but we also need to be having, like, that's the quantitative piece. We also need to be qualifying that, and we need to be having those qualitative conversations of what that looks like. And we need doctors, especially, and people handing out that diagnosis to be getting parents into the right circles, so that they don't fall down the Google rabbit hole, so that they don't fall down the Facebook rabbit hole. We need to get them to people who are out there. I'm not the only one, but we need to get them to the people who are in this space doing the work with parents, um, so that that support can also be in place.
Now, what are some of the first steps that feel human or doable?
So I think that the first couple of steps that feel human and feel doable is really kind of observing your
Mhm.
child, looking at it with a different lens, and like finding those patterns. I think when you really stop to see, like, one of the things that I created, and they're out there, so I'm not taking credit for like creating the thing, but I have a quiz, and it's what is your child's autistic love language? So
Mm.
the idea that, like, there's love languages, there's lots of information out there, and there's also lots of information about neurodivergent love languages. How is your child like bidding for that connection with you? How are they bidding for that love, right? To show you, and like to give and to receive, you know? Sure, they may not be doing it in traditional ways, or they may not be doing it in the way you expected them to do it. But you can't tell me that when your child, um, hands you a half drooping like dandelion, or an acorn from the yard that they found, that isn't a bid for connection. And why should that bid for connection be any less meaningful than a child saying, I love you, or, giving you a hug?
Mhm.
Um, it Again, it's about it really comes back to like that expectation, you
Now,
know?
to build on that, how can parents reconnect with their kids after the fog of the confusion and frustration? Because once you get that diagnosis, they're all of a sudden their mind just fogs up. They get confused. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. How can they reconnect with their child once that fog clears and now they are, okay, my child's autistic. What do we do?
So, for me, when what the kind of the journey, or like the journey that I went on and that I think parents do go on, if they board that train, and want to learn more about that and want to do right by their child, which is most parents. Um, I really believe, okay, we're observing, we're noticing patterns, we're seeing things. We're especially like we're seeing triggers. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeing this sensory piece of it, like what are they seeking out? What are they avoiding? Not only with like, the senses that we all talk about, sight, smell, touch, whatever, but those internal ones too, that interoception, that proprioception, that vestibular, those systems that are, just as, if not more important than the others. And once you make those observations, once you find those patterns, once you see those triggers and they keep presenting themselves, I think that's where the understanding of the actual differences we know about the autistic brain, those become so important to learn. I mean, for lack of a better word, like, no, we're not sitting down in a class, but like
Yeah.
connecting those patterns and observations
Mm-hmm.
to things about that we, scientifically know. And once that connection is made, I think that it's very natural
Mm-hmm.
for that reconnection and that building of the connection to happen. So like, for example, one of the I think most one of the most uh, visceral ones out there is that, for a lot of the fallacy or the myth was always out there that autistic individuals are, they're lost in their own world, or they're not responsive when somebody says their name, and not that not that they don't not respond to their name or whatever, but like the frame of which we look at that behavior
Mm-hmm.
or that observation, because the myth that was out there was that they were processing less information. They were processing it, not as quickly. Um, and they've identified now that autistic brains are actually at rest, processing 42% more information than a neurotypical brain. So when you put it into perspective like that your child at any given moment, just at rest, with no demands being placed on it, your child is processing 42% more information than a neurotypical brain. And that leads into like, well, why is that? Well, we don't have the, autistic brains don't have the same sensory filter. So they're hearing things more, in an amplified manner. They're seeing things. So like when they're saying that it's too bright, it truly
Mm-hmm.
is painful, or the sounds are painful. All of that information is incoming. All of that information is hitting them at one time. And doesn't it make more sense that maybe it takes a couple more minutes to process that information, or to respond to your name, or to any of those things, than it did before we knew that?
I mean, that kind of explains a lot of about the fact of why we have meltdowns because our mind is processing more than the neurotypical. I
Hmm.
mean, we have information constantly incoming, and people
Constantly.
don't realize this. And then you add on the fact that there are those of us who are also hypersensitive to certain sensory issues,
Yes.
smell, taste, sound, and it amplifies that from where we are to higher up.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a pot of water that now, instead of, it's not on low, it's on like medium high, and you're shocked when it boils over.
Yeah,
Like, well, medium high to boiling happens a lot more quickly than low to boiling,
yeah.
and that plays into that whole, like the whole idea that we all have this, like this battery of, this energy, and it's not endless, and it does, it is variable. And you know, taking the autistic piece of it out, if we are lucky enough to be able to observe our own patterns on like when we have the most energy or when we have the least energy as just humans for like productivity and jobs and all that stuff, like when we put it back into perspective with with the autistic brain, it makes a ton of sense that what happens when our battery hits zero. And now if you're taking in so much more information
Hmm.
at any given moment and things that are painful, like sensory needs, this isn't optional. This isn't a luxury. Like we have to, honor them. We have to honor them. And when we don't, and this happens especially in school, when we don't honor those and we don't have the choice to remove ourselves from those situations that are causing us, like to drain our battery quicker, it is, it's not hard to believe that we hit zero faster.
That's why I always feel, especially nowadays, schools need to be more aware of how to deal with a child who's autistic. There needs to be a sensory inclusive room. So when the child gets to school, they can go up to the teacher and say, listen, I'm just about in my tipping point. I need to cool down before anything happens. And they can go into that room maybe for 15, 20 minutes, enough to bring it down some so they can come out into the class and participate without being out there too long so they can actually absorb this knowledge that the school is teaching them.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the common, when you talk about like the common objections, like you hear constantly in school, well, like, well, I can't do that for that one child, how would that be fair for the rest of the class? Or how am I going to do that? How am I going to do that for all the kids, whatever. Nothing that you do specifically for an autistic child to make it more inclusive or more bearable or whatever the case may be is going to be harmful for any other kid. So, like, literally, you could do it for the entire class and no one is going to be harmed. There are people and there are kids who will be harmed if you
Mhm.
don't do it
Yeah, because
because
teachers don't
it's,
realize how violent meltdowns can get.
and even just the fact of like say that kid does hold it together, the amount of energy that it takes to do that and to
Mhm.
mask and to not not want to melt down because your friends are around or your peers are around, like there is harm in that too, right? So like whether we're melting down or we're not melting down in that moment, I think there's harm done. Now on the flip side, again, if you honor sensory needs for all, the
Mhm.
kids who need it are going to get it. The kids who didn't necessarily need it, which like I don't believe that that's even a thing either, because who doesn't need that? And who
Mhm.
doesn't need to learn how their body feels and how their brain works at school age, right? But they're going to get something out of it.
Yeah.
So I think there's not enough education um being, it's just there's such a push for testing and scores, um, and that kind of thing in the public school realm right now, that what we are losing is that these are, humans. They're not mini adults. Their job is not to be mini adults.
Mhm.
Their job is to, learn how to be like themselves and learn themselves and learn how to learn. Um, I think we've lost sight of that.
Now, I want to hit on a very important topic, and that is with the parents and how do you help them deal with the fact that they have extended family that won't be supportive or understanding
Mhm.
of their child's diagnosis because you and I know there are families out there who have their extended families, cousins, or whoever who won't accept this as a thing and who will just say, your child's just lazy. You need to teach them X, Y, and Z. How do you tell them to deal with that? Because it's hard when it's family.
Yeah, it is. And it's so I just have to say, like, how validating it is for me because that is literally like if I'm imagining in my head like the process of which like I experience things and now like I try to help parents like walk through, like
Hmm.
you literally hit on like the three like pieces, which is very validating for me that like how I saw like how I remembered it was like is how it is because first like you have to be accepting of it, right? Like you have to even
Yeah.
acknowledge it, then you have to like learn about it and like kind of get that understanding of like why this is happening, and then that final piece of it is okay, once you've done this in your immediate bubble and you've applied it there, how can we apply it outside of that environment, which is extended family, which is the school system, which is the medical system that most of our kids, we go to doctors, we go to dentists, we go to all these places and, the community piece of it. And I think, there's no right or wrong
Yeah.
way and it's personal for everyone. Everyone has different family pieces, but I think the important thing that the soapbox I will stand on about it is that, you know, what is right for you is right for you.
Hmm.
And, what that may look like is, the idea that you have to decide if the juice is worth the squeeze for certain things. Like, it is okay not to go to that picnic or that 4th of July party or that barbecue or that birthday party or whatever it is because that that is not an environment that will be conducive to your child and in the bigger sense your family, because again there's that ripple effect, right? Like when one of us is having a hard time, we're all having a hard time in family. And I think, whether it's just hearing somebody else say like it's okay to do that, there's nothing wrong with that, you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to make that decision for your family, it becomes much more about your comfort level in saying that.
All right. Now, I want to talk about something else that's you and I both know is when a parent gets the diagnosis, they think they have to become the overnight expert.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably have a lot of that with parents saying, well, I need to become this expert on my child because he's now autistic or he's got this diagnosis of being autism. I need to be the expert on my child. How do you help parents tell them you don't need to be this overnight expert? You just need to be there for them and for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it really goes back to that idea of like you you need to do one thing a day. You need to be, I hate to say better because it's like not better, but like if you can learn 1% a day, or if you can, learn, research, read, whatever, like whatever the verb is,
Hmm.
1% each day. I think that is, the really that's the solution. Now, getting there and getting that acceptance of like, okay, I see the value in that. I always like it's very easy to see with a school thing, right? Because like if you have an IEP, if you have that individualized education program that, some of our autistic kids have, and just greater learning disabilities, right? Like that document, when you're developing it, sometimes there are parents who are like unhappy, with what the school's offering, what it looks like, whatever. In my experience working in a school as a case manager, it's like, okay, we're not going to solve this overnight. We're not going to solve this in one meeting. So we have to pick and triage what is most important. So that's where, like, listen, you can learn everything you want to learn, but for your child, they're like super sensory based, or it is, you are seeing most of the traits come out in the emotional regulation, or you are seeing most of the traits coming out in whatever bucket of autism you want to look at. That's where we start. And you make that list, whether it's a mental list, whether you write it down, like you make that wish list of not who you want your kid to be and not what you want your kid to be, but if I were able to learn about these things, I feel like I would feel better, or like I feel like I would know what I need to know. Okay, well, let's put them in order because we're not going to learn them all today.
No.
It's not going to happen. And where do we start? Well, we start with the one that's going to be most helpful to you and your family.
Now, how do you help them pace emotionally and physically?
So I think that's where, when I look at, like, again, my journey, my where I was, where I am now, I think I always get very naturally pulled back to like the teaching component or like the education component. And that has happened like several times, right? And that's too like my way, like, okay, so I also adjunct for a college course on people who want the certification that I have. And this is what I talk about because I want people who are now going out into the field as professionals to also have this information, right? So there's that piece of it where, again, when I say like I naturally get pulled back into teaching, I very naturally and very quickly get pulled back into the teaching piece of it. But I also know that some parents, they don't want to take another course. They don't have time for another professional development. They don't have time to sit down for an hour and a half and watch, a series of videos to like learn things, right? Like we need snack size, bite size
Yeah.
things that we can take with us, that we can listen to in the car, that we can put on while we're doing dishes, like whatever. So I think that, understanding that piece of it, that like the teaching piece has to be done in a very intentional way. But that's where like I've never been able to ignore that support piece of it because I don't think you can do one without the other. I think that's why like the Facebook groups for the most part, and again, it's not like a blanket, it's not like a diss on them, but I think like these Facebook groups live in they call it support, right? But like this camaraderie of like we're all in the same boat.
No.
And the on the academic or the academia side, like yes, you can find courses and you can
Mhm.
find classes to take and webinars to watch that will teach you certain things, and you can find books to read. But I think until you combine those two things, each is equally important in your journey.
Now, what boundaries do you encourage them to set, especially with schools and professionals? Because parents want to set boundaries, but they don't know where and how or who and how to talk to the schools and to the professionals.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the most important thing that you as a parent have to remember is that, and I don't use this word lightly, I said it before, like, I don't call myself an expert because I am not an expert in anyone else's lived experience. I am not here to tell anyone like what they feel or who they are, right? What I would say is I'm just a person who like reads, researches, studies, and learns a lot, and then tries to, you know, connect with others who are on that same path somewhere. Why I say that is because what I think it's most important for parents to hear is that they are the expert in their child, right? Like, listen,
Hmm.
your child is the ultimate expert in themselves,
Yeah.
obviously. But very next to that, it's you as a parent. And especially parents who are who are in this, who are wanting to know all about this and who are learning about this and who really are like who have they've bought in, they've boarded the train. They're there, they're on it. They are the expert in their child. So I think, for me, even sitting as a professional in it, as a case manager, as that gatekeeper of the IEP, I have always been one to tell parents, like, you are the expert in your child. What do you think? Because I think it can be really, it can be overwhelming. That's probably an understatement for parents that they do feel like they need to know everything. And if they don't know everything, then who are they to bring up this concern, or who are they to question something that the school or the doctor's doing? I find that parents are quick to trust, those people, and rightfully so, because those people are supposed to have your child's best interest at heart. And I'm not saying that they don't, but if something in your gut says, like, no, like, I know better because they are my child, I'm with them all the time. I think that is the most important thing for parents to know and hear. That you are the expert in your child and that your opinion matters a lot.
I mean, that is so true because parents need to realize that they have an opinion. It's their child,
Yeah.
that they need to speak up to these people because if they don't, things like their IEP will not get into the right hands. I've talked with people who said, "Oh, I went to an IEP meeting and everything else, and then the next day I talked to them to make sure that the IEP was or that it was in the right hands, and then it never got handed over, and then they had to go through this whole process of arguing with the school, like, why isn't it in the teacher's hand? Why isn't it in everybody's hand so my child has the needs they need?
Yeah. Yeah. I have lived that life, and that was where, it it was always like it was a running joke that my meetings were always the longest within my team. And I took that with pride, honestly, because I spent time talking to the parents about what their rights were. Because
Mm.
here's the deal too. Like, and I know this is like it's kind of outside the realm of where we are, but when you have an autistic child, a child with a learning disability, and anything of the sort, when you have a child with special needs who falls under that law of IDEA and state law and that IEP, at the end of the day, there is a law, and that law is put into place to protect not only the schools, but the parents, and most importantly, the child.
Hmm.
If you are a school who is on the up and up and doing what you should be doing and doing it the way you should be doing it by law, you should have absolutely no problems with the parents being educated in that law. The only reason you wouldn't want parents to be educated in that law is if you are doing something that is not following it.
Yeah.
So, you know, I never I never minded sitting there and talking with parents about what their rights are, because it's A, really important for them to understand and know. B, it's really, again, it goes back to that relationship, it goes back to that rapport of, for a lot of parents, there's a shame and there's like a guilt that maybe they don't know as much about it as they would like to, or as as they've tried. And now, like, they don't want to sound like they're uneducated about it. They don't want to sound like they're ignorant to it at the meeting. So instead of asking the question, it's like that age old, like, there's never a dumb question.
Yeah.
Like, instead of asking that question, they trust. the process. And in a perfect world, that works and that's great. But in reality, we, you know, we should all be on the same team working for that
Hmm.
child. It doesn't always happen. So,
Now, we talked a lot about you helping the parents. Let's learn a little bit about you. What brought you into this work? Was there a moment where you thought, this is what I was meant to do?
yeah, so it's very interesting. I was actually just talking about this today too. So I got accepted to college for architecture. I actually more so wanted to do like interior design, stuff like that. My parents were like, no, we want you to get a college degree. I was the first one in my family to actually even go to college. And I got there, and I will always remember this. It was like I went to my first class, my first architecture class, and they were like, okay, design a backpack that turns into a chair. And I was like, yeah, I'm out. Like, this is so not like how my brain works. I very much knew that this was not going to be a thing for me. And it was also like I was doing everything, all my stuff was in loans. I went to Penn State. It was expensive back then, it's even more so now. And you know, everything was in loans. And architecture was a 5-year program, and I had to design a backpack that turned into a chair. And I was like, I can't do this. So I remember like day two, I went to my advisor, probably with 5,000 other kids, and was like, I have to get out of this. What can I do? I ended up in all these like very random classes, like because I was late registering, and ultimately ended up just being a math major. And ask me why, who knows? I think somebody, probably my mom or dad, had said at some point, like, listen, if you're going to change, you better pick something that you can get a job in because like we're not wasting time here. And so I did. I was like, okay, well, I could go teach again, like it pops up everywhere. I was like, all right, I can go teach, and who's hiring what kind of teachers, and it was math teachers that were really in demand at that time. I graduated in 3.5 years. I got done. I went and got my teaching certificate, and I started like that following year as a general education math teacher in a high school locally. Within a year, I was going back to get my special education certificate, and doing that and getting my master's in it. And then I paused and I had my children. So when I went back to it, it was very interesting how the lines kind of became parallel, because all of a sudden I was, working towards this certification where I was going to case manage IEPs and work with families, more on the family side of the disabilities. And I was also sitting at that same table as a parent for my own child. So having that dual perspective, I think, always made me um, really be able to put myself in either shoe.
Hmm.
And I think that is what made me who I was as a case manager, which, not patting myself on the back, but I was very well respected in that role. And ultimately, because I can't stop learning and teaching and all this stuff. And then I was going through it with my son, the autism piece of it, the neurodiversity piece of it. I ended up getting additional training. And that training was in a lot of the autism evaluations and the assessments. Now, obviously, I'm not a doctor. So I worked to find like a practice that would take me on as an evaluator, as an assessor, and ultimately, co-write and get the reports co-signed by a neuropsychologist who had, obviously the doctor piece of it. And I did that for a few years, and that, I would say, within the last 5, really, the case management, and that was where I was able to really organically develop
Hmm.
and find where I fit into this world. Because, and I'll add this, I know I probably gave you way more than you were expecting, but New Jersey is like one of the only states that has the certificate I have. Every other state, they special education teachers can like do my role, right? So like I'm not a school psychologist. I'm almost a step down from that because like school psychologists can do my testing, but I cannot do theirs. It like doesn't work both ways. And I have always felt because of that, that I'm in this weird gray space where everything that I do has to be from an educational lens because I'm not a doctor, I'm not clinical, I'm not medical, I don't diagnose. Um, but that I was also like living in that world still. And I feel probably for the first time in this organic space that I have found that like I really have found my niche. So, very long story short, if you had asked me if this is where I thought I would be when I entered college, I would have laughed at you.
Now, what keeps you going even on the hard days?
Oh man, it's a great question. Um, I think that the only way I can really say it is like it's not about me. Like this work is not about me. Like, so even on the hard days, even on the days where it's like, I don't feel like, I am an authority figure on any of this, right? Like, why are people looking at me for information on this? Um, it is so much more about the people I serve and the community I serve. And, just viewing it as like, if I don't do this, it is putting people at a disservice. And at the very base of everything, I am a people pleaser. So, I will continue. So that's really what it is.
All right. Now, let's get into a little bit more lighter. What myth about autism parenting you wish would just disappear?
Oh, that's a great question. All right, let me think on this one for a second because there's so many. Okay, I know. Sorry, you probably hear my dogs. Um, the myth that I don't know is so much, but well, I'll give you one for the parenting and one for just autism in general. The one for the parenting is that, and this goes back to what we were talking about, like I think before we started, is that like I think one of the reasons why the recent comments that were made about autism
Hmm.
are so inflammatory is because, you know, I think that there are so many ideas of what parenting should be and how easy it should be and how much you should enjoy it. You see all those things. You only have 18 summers with them and don't wish time away and all of these things, right? Yes. So, yes, right? Like, yes.
Yeah.
But I think for the people who are like in the thick of it and like in the days where there are meltdowns every day and they can't even see the light at the end of the tunnel and they really like they are feeling, and I felt it, like I don't know how I'm going to do this for one more day. Like I don't know if I can do this for one more day. And like listen, you don't have an option, so like you get up and you do it another day and you take
Yeah.
one step forward. You get the comments like, "Oh my God, you're so strong. I don't, I couldn't do what you're doing." Well, yeah, you could, because if it was you, you'd figure it out. Like I didn't have an option. But there is such a stigma
Hmm.
to voicing those things and even saying like those things out loud that like, and it's not all roses and sunshine and it is hard and there are days where like it is just you know you just need to start the new day, like you just need a reset, and your kids do too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's the myth that for parenting I would want. um the myth for autism in general is related to like the socialization and the friendships. And maybe, I'm most sensitive to this because I've heard it a lot from the school regarding my son. And that's Like, well, he has friends. Like, he has friends here. Like, we don't see this. He has friends. He's talking to people. He's socializing. He's leading that football game. I have had to say, and like, I don't, like, I've gotten blunt with it because I don't know how else to say it. My son's autistic. He's not antisocial. Like, yes, he has friends. He likes people, you know?
Yeah.
Just because he is autistic doesn't mean he doesn't have friends and doesn't mean he's not capable of having friends. And I think that there is this huge misconception, and I think it allows for a lot of people to not be identified or fly under the radar or be missed and not be able to connect with that authentic lived experience because it's like, well, they have friends. And it's like what I wish people understood more is that that socialization, it's draining. That like for some, like socialization fills your cup. Like
Mm.
it fills your battery. For others, it drains it. And
Yeah.
for the autistic brain, it's typically that it, you know, it drains it. And there's actually a really fun research study that was done out there, and it was a game of telephone. Have you heard about this one?
Yeah. No, no, I know I know of the game of telephone, but I haven't heard the story.
Okay, so there was this research study done, and they used essentially the game of telephone. And they had a group of only autistic brain styles, only autistic people. They had a group of only neurotypicals, and then they had a mixed group. They had like the heterogeneous group of like neurotypicals and autistics. And there were two like huge takeaways from it. Number one was that the autistic group and the neurotypical group had similar success in their game of telephone. They were able to get the message from point A to point Z with the same success rate. It was only the mixed group that had difficulty
Hmm.
communicating it down the line.
Mm.
Similarly, when they rated the satisfaction, the autistic only and the neurotypical only, they both rated their conversations success or like their happiness
Mhm.
with it the same way, like similarly. It was only the mixed group that rated it as like not as enjoyable or like less successful. And I think it's just, you know, it goes back to all of those things that we said and like the inclusion piece and the
Mhm.
socialization piece and all of that, where like when you think of it as a culture, when you think of it as its own language, like when you think about the idea of like different and not less, like autistics can socialize, they can have friends, they can communicate. It may look different, but the same way, if I went to France and tried to shake someone's hand and they went to kiss me on both cheeks, I mean, I would probably be taken aback if I didn't realize that that was the way they did things, right?
Mhm.
It's the same thing for like a neurotypical person and an autistic person. I think they communicate very well to one another because they speak the same language, or maybe not even speak the same language, but communicate with the same language and the same brain style. And you know, same for neurotypicals. And it's the mixing. It's when you sit down to play a game of whatever, and you're holding the directions to checkers, and the other person is holding the directions to chess. That's where we have difficulty because we are not playing the same game. We are not speaking the same language. We are not communicating with the same lens. But I have to ask, because I used the France, you know, example. You've traveled abroad.
Yeah.
What has your, you know, like what has your experience been with like autism in general? Because you hear that like in different countries, it's maybe, you know, not even like a thing or not, you know, whatever. It's just viewed differently. But also just like what was your experience in learning all those different social norms?
It it was different. It was difficult because I spent a week in each country and it was so much to absorb because you're going from culture to culture to culture to culture. And I remember when I first went to school, I remember walking into our little store our little convenience store on campus and seeing kids buy alcohol younger than me, and I had to sit there and remind myself their drinking age was younger than ours.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, when I even went to Paris with my best friend, walking through Soho and seeing being propositioned by girls that were in their 20s just blew my mind. And the fact that they're way ahead of us in like culture and everything else, they are not afraid of things of like advertising nudity and everything on their advertisements and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. But it was at school, it was the shock of hearing multiple dialects come from all over, and then just everything. It was tough for me for that whole year of trying not to deal with burnout because I'm being overwhelmed so much every day.
Yeah. What was so did you ever hit that point of like burnout? Like how do you work yourself out of that?
I never worked myself out of it for the whole year. What would happen would be through the week, about Friday came
Hmm.
and I would crash.
Yeah.
I would sleep great, wake up great, knowing the weekend was here. I had no classes, no nothing. It was my time, my freedom. I didn't have to worry about anything. Saturday, it was fine. Sunday, I would wake up and I'd feel like,
The
how
Sunday
you wake up
scaries.
sometimes and you're all puffy and your eyes feel like you've been crying all
Yeah.
day. I would wake up like that every day and thinking, oh, what's wrong? Do I need Sudafed? Do I have an infection? And then you add on top of that, I had a professor who almost sounded like he was underwater, and my
Okay.
mind my mind was swimming, and I said, you know what? I know my mom's not going to be happy. I'm just not going to show up to class. I emailed the professor. I said, listen, I am not feeling well. I feel under the weather. I'm sorry I'm going to have to miss your classes, but thank you.
And listen, on some level, that had to like, I mean, I would guess that that had to feel like a breath of fresh air to like make that choice for yourself.
It was kind of a breath of fresh air because it was so much because I was trying to absorb everything he was teaching. And then you add on top of that, my mind was just swimming around and I just couldn't focus. And I said, I just had to pull myself out.
Yeah. And to be able to, like to be able to do that and you know, like know that like it's right for you.
Yeah.
I think that's like and I guess, it's just interesting. It all in every situation you can almost bring it back to like what the expectation was versus like
Mhm.
what you did or what happened. Um and that's where it's like you're just constantly having to reframe your expectations on
Yeah, I
everything as a
mean,
human.
yeah, as a human, yeah. I mean, I had to constantly change from travel and deal with different dialects, different with accents, different cultures. I mean, but the one thing that shocked me is out of nowhere, all of a sudden I started mimicking the accents, and I didn't know why until one day at school I had a friend go, "Are you doing this on purpose?" I'm like,
Okay.
"No, it just happens to happen."
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
Did you
if you
keep,
could
did it,
go on
did you, sorry, like, did you keep any of that? Like
the
when you came
accents,
home? Yeah.
mm, that's I still do. I mean, even if I'm talking to a friend who's from another country, I will mimic it and I won't even
Yeah.
know it. I do it. When I traveled, even every country I was in, Ireland, I started speaking with an Irish accent. Except for Spain and France, but for England and Ireland, yeah.
Ah, that's cool. I have one more question for you if it's okay.
Right.
So, being autistic,
Yeah.
if you had to give one piece of advice or say something to say like a tween or a teenager who, you know, whether or not they know they're autistic or they're
Hmm.
perceiving differences, whatever, and they feel as though they are the only one going through what they're going through.
Hmm.
What would your piece of advice or what would you share with them.
I'd say, listen, you're not alone in this world. There are many of us out there going through the same thing you are. You gotta think on the positive and not the negative. You got the negative is thinking you're the only one, but you gotta take that and flip it. That there are many of you going through the same thing, each person with their own issues. But you gotta remember there's help. You just gotta find it.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for especially like young people
Yeah.
to hear. I think because, at that their brains are still developing. So like it's so easy for them to feel and truly feel
Yeah.
like they are alone in it. And they're not, they're not. We all just have to find our people.
I mean, that's why it's so important for the parents to come out of that fog and realize I need help. I need to help myself, but I also need to get the help for my son or daughter because they're going to need it through life.
And I think that's where too, like again, you bring up the expectation piece of it. Like there are many parents, like I would say one of the most common expectations that a parent has for their child is the expectation of like friendships and friends. And I think that they very genuinely want to put that on their child of like they want them to have lots of friends or they want them to have lots of social opportunities. And I think like that's one of the most important areas for them to connect with their kids and to hear like what their kid wants. Because for some they may want in real life friendships. For some they may feel much more comfortable like with virtual friends. Some may want to do activities and others may not. I think that we as parents have to on that piece. I mean, it's all important, but that is one of the things I hear from most parents is
Mhm.
like, I just want my kid to have friends.
Yeah.
But when you talk with the child, they do have friends. They're just not friendships that the parent perceives as, I don't want to say good enough, but like what they thought they'd have.
Now, if you can whisper one thing to every parent at the beginning of this journey, what would it be?
Oh man, hang in there. It's going to be okay. And
Huh?
you are not alone.
Now, what gives you hope about these families or how we're talking about autism today?
I think the biggest thing that gives me hope is that there are these conversations happening. And I think that that is, you know, the first step, most important step. We just have to keep having these conversations. We have to keep um, getting it out there and we have to keep sharing it because, you see it generationally. Like we are different than our parents are different than their parents. And why did that happen? Because, different things happened at different times. Our kids are going to be better for it because we are having these conversations. And I think that we just need to continue to do so.
And finally, where can people find out more about you and learn more about you, Kate?
So people can find me. I am mostly on Instagram and Facebook at Kate Panfile. Looks like Panfile, but it's pronounced Panfile. And they can find me there. Also working on building out my website, also katepanfile.com, so that there is a home base for my community and for people to be able to sign up. Hopefully, by the time this airs, we will be open with our founding members
Mhm.
and the people who are really going to help, build the airplane while it's taking off. Because again, it's not something for me to build for them. It's something for us to build together. And my hope is that that's exactly what it'll be.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles, and that was Kate Panfile, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
And